Welcome to episode 2 of This Day in History here on the GoodMicWork channel. While episode 1 chronicled one of the biggest and most infamous nights in the history of the Monday Night Wars, this episode is going to be about one of the nights that we thought was going to start a brand new Monday Night War. Can you believe it's been 5 years already since the brain surgeons in TNA thought it would be a great idea to take their TV show that gets about the same ratings as Facts of Life reruns and go head-to-head with the big, powerful WWE that's had Monday Night Raw on TV for 20 years. I'll give TNA a little bit of credit, though. They did pull out all the stops on this night. I remember being a little irritated with some of the things that was going on their show. A lot of fans, especially hardcore WWE haters and people that really love TNA, they were just frothing at the mouth over this. They really thought that this was going to be the end of the WWE. And one of the things I said in my very first commentary ever about TNA is that they're bullshitting themselves, and it's just driving me crazy. TNA, is trying to be this alternative wrestling company. Great. We need that, TNA. Keep doing it. Because I think I was just as disgusted with the WWE as a lot of other people, a lot of the really rabid haters. My difference is, though, I just stopped watching the fucking shit. These guys watched it every week. It just made them matter, and it made them love TNA even that much more. So now TNA, this alternative wrestling company that's giving us good in-ring wrestling, something that WWE sometimes would not do. It was more wrestling and it was less of the hokey shit. And now they're going to go head-to-head with Raw, bring in Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff and a whole bunch of old former WWE guys, and then still claim to be this alternative product? No, now you're the exact same thing as the WWE, just on a minor league level. You have now transformed your whole company into a minor league WWE. That's not going to fucking work. Going head-to-head with Monday Night Raw to begin with wasn't going to work. They needed to keep with their formula. They needed to keep doing what they were doing. They just got greedy. It's like Dixie Carter saw a little bit of success. A lot of fans, of TNA really were supporting the company hard, and they thought they had enough to actually compete with WWE. No, don't even fucking try. Your company will be much more successful and make much more money if you stick with what you're doing and don't fucking worry about the WWE. Didn't you learn anything from WCW? These motherfuckers spent every hour of the day studying and reacting to every single thing the WWE did. Don't be that way. Don't make those mistakes. You have a lot of wrestling fans out there that respect your product. Don't fuck it up by bringing all these fucking yahoos in here, paying Hogan God knows how much money to come in and give your company some publicity and be your poster boy. How long was he there? 4 years? He bled you dry and he headed back to WWE. Money well spent, morons. Money well spent. And from the very first day of this shit, I was pulling my hair out because all I was hearing is that, TNA, they're going to fucking kill the WWE finally, this crappy Monday Night Raw. We're going to never have to worry about it again. TNA is going to be the new thing in wrestling. They didn't get it. It's not fucking 1995. This is not the launching of Nitro. This is the launching of Impact. It's completely different. The WWE isn't the same vulnerable little third grader they were in 1995. Now they're the big bad bully on the playground, and you don't want to fuck with them. And how long did this shit last? Several weeks? They were getting the fucking most hilarious ratings. The worst ratings ever. 0.6s and 0.8s and shit like that. Why are you going head-to-head with Raw? That makes no sense. The few fans that you have, why do you want to risk losing them to Raw? It was just one of the dumbest fucking decisions. It's just like everybody in the wrestling business that tries to get into the wrestling business other than Vince McMahon are completely fucking dumb. WWE makes some stupid decisions now, but they're so big they can absorb those stupid decisions. Companies like WCW and TNA, they cannot afford to do some of the dumb shit they were doing. And like I talked about in episode 1, when WCW was so concerned with the WWE, instead of focusing on themselves and their own storylines, their own angles, their own product, they were so worried about the WWE that they tried to one-up them by giving away the results of Raw and wound up fucking themselves in the ass. And now you got TNA that's so concerned with WWE and what they're doing. They said, now we've got Hulk Hogan now. We've got a WWE guy here. And you know what? They brought in a lot of WWE guys that night. I could not believe that Jeff Hardy showed up on that night. I could not believe that Ric Flair showed up on that Impact on Monday night. I was fucking blown away by that. So I'll give TNA credit for trying. They definitely made a lot of waves in that first show. It was amazing to see all these guys out there. You had Hogan, you had Hall, you had Nash, you had Bischoff. I think you even had X-Pac out there. Like I said, Jeff Hardy, Ric Flair. And I couldn't help but to think about AJ Styles and Robert Roode and some of the other great wrestlers they have there, wrestlers that helped build that company's foundation and build their reputation. TNA was very popular amongst fans that liked good wrestling. Even in the UK, TNA is very popular in England because I think a lot of those fans appreciate good wrestling. That's why those guys are some of my favorite listeners. I have a ton of listeners, from the UK and over there. And, they're all very passionate and they all know their wrestling, and a TNA, a company like that is just what fans like that needed. And then TNA goes and fucks it all up by bringing Hogan and all these ex-WWE guys. Now, what makes you different from the WWE now? Why do you stand out from the WWE if all you're trying to do is be the WWE? And they even changed the ring. Remember? It was 6 sides. It went to 4 sides when Hogan came on board. So everything that they once had that separated themselves from WWE and gave them a different identity was gone. You had the same ring, you had the same stars, and you had a smaller crowd. Explain to me how you expect that to compete with Monday Night Raw, an established program that's been on the USA Network for 2 fucking decades. It was enough, however, to make the WWE take notice because they actually stacked their show as well. They were aware that Impact was going to be going head-to-head with them from now on, and they knew they were going to have a big first show, so the WWE decided we better have a big show as well. And in one of the most nail-biting moments personally for me, how this night affected me, I was on the edge of my fucking seat. You guys know my thoughts on Bret Hart. I have talked about the screw job and the situation between Bret and Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels for years on these commentaries. I shouldn't have to rehash any of it. With all of that going on over 12 years that it was before these guys even saw each other, all the bad blood, Bret Hart finally coming back into the WWE to work a WrestleMania match with Vince McMahon. But first, he's got to make his return. He comes out to open the show on that January 4th Raw, so I think you had Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels in one ring on Raw, and then on Impact you had Hogan, Hall, and Nash in the other. So I think those 2 segments were going head-to-head. Now, I don't know what kind of ratings they did. All I could tell you is I never once flipped over to TNA. Not once. My eyes were glued to Bret Hart stepping inside of a ring, a WWE ring, for the first time in 12 fucking years. He has not seen or spoken one word to Shawn Michaels in that same amount of time, and now he's back, and the first thing he does is get on the mic and say, hey, it's good to be back. I'd like to call out Shawn Michaels. I was mesmerized by the sight of it, and I got to tell you, it was a little awkward. I think we all can agree on that a little bit. I mean, it just seemed like, I don't know, I just would have liked to see a little bit more emotion out of these guys. I mean, they're finally in the ring together. They're finally talking about what happened. The story goes that Bret and Shawn really didn't say anything to each other during the day because they had to see each other, and I think the story has come out now. I think they bumped into each other in catering, said hello, and exchanged a couple of words, but agreed that they're not going to say really anything until they get out to the ring. So they tried to make it as legit as possible, but you could tell that Bret, I love Bret. He was probably my favorite wrestler of all time, but I'll be the first one to admit Bret's faults. He's not a perfect guy by any means, and some of the things he said in interviews and in his book, and I don't completely agree with all the time, but I still loved him as a performer and loved him as a wrestler, and he was one of my favorite characters ever. So even though my respect for Bret Hart goes through the roof, I by no means believe this man is perfect. And I think I was under the impression that Bret, even though he wanted to bury the hatchet, I just don't know if he can ever truly let go of that anger. I just think he hates Shawn Michaels. I mean, if you listen to some of Bret Hart's interviews after the screw job, years after, 5, 6, 7 years sometimes, he always referred to Shawn Michaels as a cowardly chicken shit little fucker that he would love to strangle if he ever had the chance. Never once did Bret Hart have a good thing to say about Shawn at all. Bret always praised Shawn's in-ring work. He always said he was one of the greatest athletes he'd ever been in the ring with, but he just thought the guy was a piece of shit, never believed him, even called him out on his religion. He's just like, I don't believe in any of this crap. I just think he's fucking full of shit, and deep down he's the same old Shawn Michaels, and he's just making up this supposed relationship with God, and like he's a changed man, but he was like, leopards don't change their spots, and I don't trust him at all, and fuck that guy. So I really never thought Bret Hart was even capable of forgiving Shawn Michaels, and when you watch the promo, Bret Hart just didn't seem completely into it or completely emotionally into the moment. And even the hug was fucking awkward. I loved the moment where they shook hands. Shawn Michaels kind of turned away from Bret, started to leave the ring, and kind of turns his head back. You weren't sure, oh man, is he going to super kick Bret? Because he was kind of in the stance for that. And then he turns around really quickly and goes in for the hug. And both guys had mics in their hands, and it was kind of that awkward, one-handed, just patchy on the back type of hug. I would have liked to see both guys throw their microphones down, hug each other tight, two hands, and maybe Shawn just kind of talk to Bret personally in his ear that only the two of them can hear, and maybe Shawn could say really what he wanted to say. And I think these guys have had that conversation, since then, and I know they're pretty much on good terms now. They've seen each other a bunch of times. They did that great DVD and documentary together where they sat side by side with Jim Ross and talked about the whole situation. So I think these guys have definitely put it behind them, and I praise both of them for it. But that first promo on that Raw that night, I just didn't feel the emotion emotion. They didn't get, even though it was awesome to see him shake hands, it was awesome to see him in the ring again together and actually bury the hatchet. I just wish it could have been a little bit more emotional. I wanted somebody to cry or something. You know what I mean? Because when you think about it, how many times in the wrestling world do we get these real life situations that cross over into our storylines? I mean, this was a serious deal. This is something that's real life. What happened to Bret Hart, what Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels did to him at the Survivor Series was real life. There was hurt feelings and bad blood for over a decade. 12 years, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart never even spoke to each other, and now they're seeing each other for the first time. I just think it should have been, I don't know, I think these guys could have done a better job of being a little bit more emotional about it, and I think part of the reason is that Bret Hart, even though he was doing it and he was saying it, I question whether or not Bret Hart truly believed it. I thought maybe he was just out there to give his fans the closure they wanted, one more match with Vince McMahon. He wanted to swallow his pride and come in and work with all these people that screwed him over, you know, just for his fans, for him to get his DVD done and I don't know, anything else he wanted to get done. Because, you know, when Bret Hart is associated with the WWE, his family can get a lot of publicity. They've done several Bret Hart or Hart family member DVDs since he's come back. They were able to get his dad into the Hall of Fame and shit like that. So I think a lot of that was probably Bret's motivation. And when he came back, he just kind of sucked it up and said, I don't really trust Vince, Triple H, or Shawn, but I'm going to work with him anyway because it's better for me and my family's legacy, I guess. But then just from the outside looking in, once Bret Hart got there, you know, and he was there for a few months and he worked with Vince and he was able to talk to Shawn Michaels some more, and he came back in once or twice to do some matches like at SummerSlam and other personal appearances that he's done since his return in 2010, I think Bret Hart truly now looks like somebody that's a little bit more at peace. He truly has his closure now. Because I don't know if that opening segment on that January 4th Raw with Shawn Michaels, I don't know if that was truly the closure that Bret Hart needed. I think his closure came a few months after that, once he was back for a while and he felt comfortable, and then, you know, he felt like he was at peace with the whole situation. Bret's the type of guy that I don't think will ever forget it. You know, he really feels like he was wronged, and he still, you know, stands by that. You know, I might be working with Vince, I might come back and, you know, all's forgiven, but really I'll never forget. You can forgive, but you can't forget, basically, is what Bret's philosophy is. And he's right. I can see his point totally. If that happened to me, I don't know if I'd ever be able to go back there and work with them. But, you know, I think it's cool that everybody kind of admitted, you know, their sides of it. You know, Bret Hart said, hey, I'm not completely innocent. Yeah, I had my problems too, and I was difficult to work with, but I was only reacting to having to deal with this fucking prick Shawn Michaels, who's also not putting me over and all that stuff. We all know the story, but it's just nice to see that all of that finally came to a head after all those years, you know, on that Monday Night Raw. And that's what WWE went with. They were counting on the fans wanting to see Bret and Shawn in the ring together for the first time in 12 years over seeing Hogan, Hall, Nash, and Bischoff in the ring on another show. And they did. I can't remember what the ratings were, but I know WWE completely demolished them. TNA got a pretty good rating, you know, but they didn't do, it was probably the best rating they got the whole time they were going head-to-head with Raw, because after that, it was just so fucking downhill. And WWE's ratings were nothing special anyway. What are they getting? 2.5s and 3s, and TNA is getting like 0.9. So it's not like WWE is setting the world on fire in the ratings, but when you compare them to TNA, they were 2, if not 3 times more than them, pretty much on a weekly basis. And I think by the time, I don't know, you guys can fill me in, was it March or April? It didn't take long, and TNA said, fuck it, pulled the plug on the whole thing, went back to Thursday nights or Friday nights or whatever the fucking night they came on. That's where they needed to be. That's where they needed to stay all along. And I'm glad they learned their lesson from their boneheaded experiment. There was just no way they were going to be able to compete. I remember thinking at the time, too, I was a little disappointed in Jeff Hardy and Ric Flair for showing up on that show as well, because it's not, I wouldn't have cared if they went over to TNA, because, you know, if they're not working for the WWE, they have the right to do whatever they want. But when they show up on that particular show, that gives the illusion, you know, because this is TNA firing a shot at WWE, saying, we want to start a war with you. And Jeff Hardy and Ric Flair, a fucking guy that they just gave such a beautiful send-off to less than 2 years before this. I just thought he was such an ingrate for going over there. I mean, I'm sure TNA paid him well, but to show up on that first show like that, on the show that's going head-to-head with the company that has made your legacy greater than it could ever be, I just think that was kind of a shitty thing to do. Jeff Hardy, same thing. I mean, he was there. WWE, they should have fired this guy. Not only was he not fired, they gave him the world title. I mean, that's crazy. They really loved Jeff Hardy, and they understood that the fans had a connection with him. He was over his shit. His merchandise sold well. Fans all across the board, young, old, man, woman, child, loved this guy, and the WWE gave him opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And here, as soon as he leaves the WWE, fresh off of his world title program with CM Punk, he jumps over to TNA TNA on their head-to-head show. So I thought Ric Flair and Jeff Hardy just kind of did a shitty thing that night. I know a lot of fans might disagree with that. I totally understand that these guys are not contractually obligated to anybody, and there's no law that says you have to remain loyal to the WWE, but I just think showing up on this particular TNA show, this head-to-head show with Raw, this new Monday Night War that TNA is trying to start, and to have a bunch of old WWE guys show up there, guys that were just in the company months prior to this, I think it was kind of a little bit shitty. Especially those two guys. Maybe I wouldn't care if it was anybody else. I probably wouldn't care. But the fact that Ric Flair and Jeff Hardy, two guys that were treated extremely well by the WWE. And Jeff Hardy wasn't the only guy that had legal troubles either. I mean, Ric Flair had his share of that as well. WWE always took care of them, treated them well, gave Ric Flair, like I said, the greatest send-off any wrestler in the history of the business could ask for. Jeff Hardy, you think about where he came from, being in jobber matches from age 15, being a little guy weighing 180 pounds and beating guys like Triple H and winning world titles in the WWE. You would never expect that. Only the WWE could pull off and market a guy like him, and they did. But anyway, it's business. What the fuck do I care at the end of the day? I just kind of wish he would have just stayed clean and stayed with the WWE, because all of his demons and shit came back to him in TNA. He had the drug problem. He had that match that he couldn't even compete in, with Sting, and they had to send him out of the ring, or he had to get beat in like 10 seconds or whatever. So, Jeff Hardy going to TNA, I don't think did his personal life and his health any favors. I hold no grudges. I look back at this night as a pretty funny night in the history of wrestling because, we had the beginning of what would have been a new Monday Night War. The problem is TNA was just not big enough to compete. But they tried to do things just like WCW. They had some surprises. On the first Nitro, Lex Luger jumped ship and showed up on Nitro. And here on the first Impact, you have Ric Flair and Jeff Hardy jumping ship. You have Hogan showing up in TNA for the first time. Hall was there. Nash was there. And Bischoff coming in was strange as well. It was like WCW was reborn. And it would have been nice if it could have gotten to that point. But in 2010, WWE was already so far ahead, there was no way. It would have been cool. I mean, it did give you that WCW feel. Having all those guys in that opening segment, in the ring, in a smaller looking type of promotion, with different production values and shit like that. It kind of gave you that feel. And I was hopeful, I guess, that maybe, something could come of it. But you just knew TNA was not strong enough. Even in the WWE's vulnerable, stale state, it still wasn't enough for some new company to come along and just overthrow them overnight. If TNA would have kept at it for 3 years, maybe they could have garnered a little more, attention, and maybe some fans could have started taking notice. But, the ratings gap was so extreme that there was just no way. I mean, the company was probably losing money doing this. They're already paying a ton of it out to Hogan and all these other yahoos that they brought in. So it was just not a good idea all around. And, looking at TNA and their management, it's like it's their WCW junior. They take all the dumb decisions that WCW made throughout the years and redo them again, just on a smaller level. So anyway, I'm not here to rag on TNA. That's not what this channel series is about. But when you look back at this particular day, January 4th, 2010, even the hardest of hardcore TNA fans have to agree that that was a stupid fucking idea. You have to agree because you have no argument otherwise. The very reason you like TNA and the very reason you probably became a TNA fan to begin with is that it was something other than Vince McMahon's fucking product. And what does TNA think the best way to compete with Vince McMahon's product is to make a smaller version of Vince McMahon's product. You have to agree with me on that. I'm not wrong. My days of attacking and trashing and insulting TNA are long over. I have absolutely nothing against that company. I don't have anything against any company that's trying to succeed because the more competition we have, the more jobs we have for wrestlers. So don't think that I hate TNA and I want them to go out of business, unlike a lot of TNA fans who want the WWE to go out of business. That's what I used to hear from those fans back in the day. What kind of sense does that make from a wrestling fan? Why would you want the WWE to go out of business? Why? So all these wrestlers can be jobless? That's what you want? I don't think that way. I don't have that selfish of a brain. To me, I might ridicule TNA because of the dumb decisions they make, but it's only out of frustration. It's only because I wish this company could be more successful. I wish they could make decisions that actually made sense. The wrestling business could use some competition, but this particular idea of going head-to-head with Raw, changing your alternative six-sided ring into a four-sided ring and bringing a bunch of ex-WWE guys and parading them on your show, to me, made no fucking sense at all. It seemed like you would be alienating your core audience, which is wrestling fans. And, tell me if I'm wrong. Am I wrong about that? If I am wrong, I sure would like to hear the reasons of why I am. So all of you TNA fans that think that this episode might be an attack on TNA, I assure you it is not. I love wrestling and I just want it to be good. But TNA Impact on Monday nights was not good. And I even remember saying when this announcement of Hogan and Bischoff was first made and TNA decided that they're going to move Impact to Monday night and go head-to-head with Raw, I said it before it even happened. Even months later when I started doing my commentary, some of you might remember, I said some of the same things. What I was saying is, where does this put the TNA company in 2 years? Where does it put them in 3 years? Where does it put them in 5 years? And here we are 5 years later to the day since TNA made all of these big changes, and where are they? They lost their TV deal. There was rumors of them completely going out of business just a few months ago. They did finally switch back to the six-sided ring, which was actually really nice to see. But really, overall, it seemed like all of that caused TNA to take a couple of steps back. They seem like they're actually a smaller company now than they were before Hogan and Bischoff even got there. And that was my point. That's what I was jumping up and down and screaming and banging my head against the wall back in 2010, because I was like, how can nobody see that this simply is not going to work? Give the wrestling fans something that WWE cannot give them. That's the whole fucking secret. If you can do that, you might have a chance. The problem is TNA has never once given their fans anything that the WWE cannot give them. And don't say, oh yeah, well what about the Ultimate X matches? Look, if WWE wanted to hang a couple of fucking ropes in an X shape over the ring and hang a title from it, they could do it. You put Ziggler and Rollins and Ambrose and Cesaro in an Ultimate X match, I promise you it will be good. So TNA's got to start thinking here. What can they do that WWE can't? And that's what they need to focus on. If they do that, you know, they can be a moderately successful wrestling company, and that's what I want, because I don't want everybody to be under the boot of Vince McMahon. You think I want that? I don't want to live in a wrestling world where the wrestlers are too scared to speak up. I want more CM Punks out there. I want another guy in WWE to walk into Vince McMahon and Triple H's office and flip him the middle finger and say, fuck you, I'm out of here, I want out of my contract, and hop over to TNA and go work there. All these wrestlers that work so hard to accomplish their dream, they deserve to have multiple places to go. And it's nice to see Alberto Del Rio kind of doing that right now. I hope he shows up in TNA. He could be a great character for them. He could be a great heel for them. And that's not even them just grabbing a WWE guy. This is a guy that actually has talent, something to offer. TNA could actually utilize him probably better than the WWE did. TNA could use someone like that. And a lot of the internet wrestling community, a lot of the fans are really supportive of Alberto Del Rio. So if they were to get a hold of him, I think a lot of fans would tune in. I sure would. I never watched TNA. But if Alberto Del Rio goes over there and I hear about it and I know when he's going to debut, I'll tune in. Guys jumping ship is always great in pro wrestling, especially in competition, as long as it doesn't get too out of hand. And that was what WCW and TNA's problem was. It seemed like not only were they grabbing some stars that the fans wanted to see, they were grabbing some stars that the fans didn't give a fuck about. And sometimes I think TNA will throw any amount of money at any former WWE guy simply because he was in the WWE. Yes, the company should bring in Alberto Del Rio. Brodus Clay and Snitsky, not so much. I don't know what it is about their crazy obsession that as long as you have some sort of WWE affiliation at all, that is basically a foot in the door to TNA, and that's wrong. So there you have it for episode 2. I think I've already got my next couple of episodes figured out. They'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Thank you again for all your support on this channel. Don't forget to click that like button. Unless you are a crazy TNA fan, you might be clicking the dislike button. Either way, if you do, I really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, did not mean to offend any TNA fans at all. I know I have a lot of you that listen to my channel. I'm just trying to speak my opinions and tell it the way I see it. That's all. So if I offended you, I truly apologize. Hopefully you'll subscribe anyway. And here's some of the other shit that I say that you actually might like. So until episode 3, take care. Peace.